Okay, so this is the Bible study for First Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 through 11. And it's just a short text today. I know that last week we took 2 full chapters because it was a big, long story. But this is a shorter story, a shorter text, and I think there's still a lot of richness here. So the text for today says, So the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord. They brought it to Abinadab's house on the hill and consecrated Eleazar his son to guard the ark of the Lord. The ark remained at Kiriath Jearim a long time, 20 years in all. Then all the people of Israel turned back to the Lord. So Samuel said to all the Israelites, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtaroths and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the Israelites put away their Baals and their Ashtaroths and served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, assemble Israel, all Israel at Mizpah, and I will intercede to the Lord for you. When they had assembled at Mizpah, they drew water and poured it out before the Lord. On that day they fasted, and there they confessed, we have sinned against the Lord. Now Samuel was serving as leader of Israel at Mizpah. When the Philistines heard that Israel had assembled at Mizpah, the rulers of the Philistines came up to attack them. When the Israelites heard of it, they were afraid because of the Philistines. They said to Samuel, do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines. Then Samuel took a suckling lamb and sacrificed it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and the Lord answered him. While Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day the Lord thundered with loud thunder against the Philistines and threw them into such panic that they were routed before the Israelites. The men of Israel rushed out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, slaughtering them along the way to a point below Beth Kar. All right. So you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study to follow along in the questions with us at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And this is the Bible study for 1 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 through 11. Number 1 says, what happened in our last study in 1 Samuel 5 and 6? So remember, during that text, during that story, what was happening. In fact, in chapter 4, the Philistines had captured the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, because Israel had taken it down to battle and thought that it was going to allow them to win the battle because they had God on their side, because they had the ark with them. That didn't happen. The Philistines took it captive. They put it in their temple for Dagon, and Dagon was found bowing down to this to the ark or to God, and that happened twice. And then they were afflicted with sort of a plague, the tumors, and ultimately they sent it back to Israel. And then when it got to Israel, there was a sacrifice made, but 70 people looked into the ark and they were struck dead. And then the people of that town said, let's send it on to somewhere else. So that's where we pick up this story. That's why it's important for us to remember, because the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark. And so this is when they came to pick it up to bring it to their place. Now, what it seems like is that, I don't know about you, but with that story from last week, I would probably be tempted to not come and get it. If they were going to send it to my town, I would say, no, don't bring that here, and we're not coming to get it either. And yet the men of Kiriath Jearim came to get the ark and took it down to Abinadab's house. And here's Abinadab, who is going to house this thing, and Eleazar, his son, is going to guard it. Well, this seems like a different situation than the situation at Beth Shemesh, where they didn't want this around. There's somebody that's willing to take it into his own home, and his son will guard it. Um, and the people of this town came to get it. And so this story, that's sort of an introduction to this story, which suggests that this story is going to go a little bit different than the last. Number 2 says what happens in 7:1 and 2. I already talked to you about that. I told you that they came and got it. They brought it, and Abinadab's house was going to house it, and Eleazar is going to guard it. Number 3, was this the place where worship would happen? Why didn't they take it back to Shiloh, where it had been in the tent of meeting before the battle when it was taken? So there's a sense in which you would think this needs to go to the place where the tent of meeting is. Now remember that the tent of meeting is mobile at this point, and the temple is not built until the time of Solomon, after David wants to build it. And so the tent of meeting may have been moved, but it's possible that the people of Shiloh felt the same way as the people of Beth Shemesh. It's possible that that Israel was still feeling a little overwhelmed with the thought of this being accessible, and they were interested rather in putting it away. But we find out that the people of God still are assembling for worship, and there's a sense that there's definitely repentance in this text, and there's a very real repentance that we're going to talk about that Samuel is calling for, and he's calling for signs of that very real repentance. Now, Shiloh was a place that there may have been a hiccup there. I had something happen over here while I was recording, but Shiloh was the place where worship had been going on for some time. But it was also part of the prophecy that Eli's line would be vacated. And there's some thought that kind of Shiloh itself was destroyed or cursed or sort of vacated as well with that time. So, oh boy, let me get my Bible study back up here. So number 4 says what happens in 7:2b. So that's under the heading, if you have an NIV Bible, it's the next heading, and it says, then all the people of Israel turn back to the Lord. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on during this Bible study, is all the people of Israel turn back to the Lord. Number 5, what does Samuel say in 7:3 in response to this? So Samuel said to all the Israelites, if you're returning to the Lord with all your hearts. Now let me read these answers. A, awesome, it's about time, let's have a potluck. So when somebody says we're coming back to God, here's one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of times we in the modern church have a tendency to sort of take that at face value. Oh, you want to come back to God? Awesome, praise God. Here you are, you're in church. We kind of assume, yeah, they're really returning to God. But the truth is, there's a lot of people that say they return to God with their mouths, but they don't return to God with their hearts and with their lives. And so what they've really done is they might have returned to church attendance, or they might have returned to thinking positive thoughts about God, whereas before they weren't thinking at all about God. Or they might have returned to listening or reading, maybe reading the Bible or doing devotions of some sort. And so when they say they've returned to God, they're sort of identifying that with one small thing that they're beginning to do. And I say they, but maybe I should say that we're beginning to do, that sort of designates or delineates for us that we've returned to God. But Samuel doesn't say, oh, okay, you're returned to God, awesome. And the reason he doesn't is because Samuel was priest in a time and in a place where people had served God all along. And so the people had worshiped God and been in church and brought offerings, but the priests were ungodly, and they were still offering sacrifice, and they were still, worshiping God, or at least going through the ritual of worshiping God. And so what Samuel knew and what was obvious to him was that not everybody who says, now this is a New Testament text quote, but not everybody who says to me, Lord, Lord, really knows me or loves me, okay, or will end up in heaven, okay? So Samuel lived in a time where that was obvious because he had seen the worst of corruption happening amongst the people who called themselves the people of God. Now, I would argue that we're in the same sort of time today, and that there are people all over the place, especially in America, that say that they're Christian, that maybe they attend church, maybe they don't. Maybe they really serve God and live their lives out for him, and maybe they don't at all. They live for themselves, but they do go to church occasionally. And so I would say that we're in the same kind of context and setting into which Samuel was speaking, and Samuel felt the need to say to the people that said they were going to be serving God, that said they were returning to God, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts. So he doesn't assume that because they said we're returning to God, that, oh, they're returning to God. Instead, he questions a little bit deeper, he challenges a little bit more, and he says, if you are really returning to God and it's with all your hearts, then this is what you would do. This is what that would look like if you were really doing that. Because at this point, now he's going to be able to see whether Israel is serious about returning to God with all their hearts, or whether they just want to be perceived as spiritual and go through the motions and the rituals of worship again, and still not return to God. And so he says, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves, this is C, rid yourselves of foreign gods and the Ashtaroths, and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only. So if you're really returning to him with all your heart, don't just say it with your mouths. Get rid of the other gods. Get rid of the other things that have taken your worship. Get rid of the other things that have been the objects of your affection. Get rid of the other things that have taken priority in your life. Get rid of the things that have taken the place of God in your life. Now, I just want to say this. That in our culture there is a plethora of religions. There's religions everywhere, and so maybe that's another religion and another god like the Asheroths and those things. But I would say that America is increasingly a secular culture, having nothing to do with religion, desiring to be considered religious in a lot of cases, but not doing anything that actually sort of shows that we really believe in a true and supernatural God. And so I don't care what religion that you say you are. There are plenty of people that say they're Mormon, that say they're Muslim, that say they're Christian, that say they're all sorts of things, but they're really secular humanists. They're really self-idolaters. The God of their life is actually their own pleasures and desires and comforts, because that's the thing that actually guides their decisions. So if Samuel was speaking today, he may be concerned about the worship of other gods, but he also may be concerned about the worship of your house, your car, your schedule, your children, and all of the things that take priority in your life above God himself. And if it was if he was to say that, he would say, if you really return to God with all your life, then worship him and serve him only, and the things that are taking your attention away from him, you may need to do away with. Now, I'm not suggesting we get rid of our families and we commit ourselves to a life of homelessness, but I'm saying that our understanding of the priorities needs to be clear. Honestly, I believe in my personal family life that when my family puts God first, everything goes better. And so I don't have to worship my family, because my family can put God first, and we all understand that God's first. But it's very easy for the other priorities of life to inch in and try to vie for attention and affection, and that's very true. And then D, the interesting thing is that this comes with a promise that God made a covenant with his people. If you obey me fully, then I will be your God and you will be my people. And he has promised to take care of his people and dwell with his people. And so this commitment that Samuel is calling the people of God to make comes with a promise from God, and it says, and he will deliver you out of the hands of the Philistines. Now, the cool thing is, it doesn't take very long for them to sort of come to a place where God is, they're not testing God, because they're not testing God in a bad way anyway, because they choose to worship God. They gather together, they throw away all these things, and they choose God first, and then the Philistines come up to attack. So they have an immediate opportunity to see if God really follows through on his promises, and he does, by the way. Spoiler alert. I know you're supposed to say that before you give the spoiler, but we're going to get there anyway. It's all right. Number 6, is this still how we return to God today? It should be. Depending on how you interpret this question, is this the way we return to God? If we're returning to God, yes, it is. Is it the way most people choose to return to God? No. Most people who return to God do not put away their idols. They do not put away the things that have taken precedence over God. And they try to hold on to God and those things together. And so there are plenty of people whose God honestly is their genitals, and they're choosing pleasure over God, and they do it regularly. And so sexual immorality is rampant. Okay. And I'm not trying to be crude or crass, but I'm just laying it out there. This is true. People are choosing all sorts of things instead of God, and they think that, oh, maybe we can hold on to both. I can come to church and serve God, but still, I'm sleeping with my girlfriend, or still I have this addiction to pornography, and masturbation is an issue. Okay, so here's the thing that I'm trying to say. is that it's very important to understand that today God calls us to return to him in exactly the same way that God through Samuel called Israel to return. And that is to put aside all the things that you have put up as the most important thing in your life, that you have put up as the thing that you won't give over to God. All the things that you know are not pleasing to God, that God has commanded against, that you've been holding on, but you came back to church, so you think that that's okay because you've really returned to God. Samuel, and I believe God is saying to us, if you are really returning to God with all your heart, put these things away. Now 7 says, what did the Israelites do according to 7:4? So it says, so the Israelites put away their Baals and Asheroths and served the Lord only. Amazing. That is that I'll just be honest with you. If you read the Bible much in the Old Testament, this is a rare story. It happens periodically, but the people of Israel in the Old Testament there are far more stories. I've never counted them one by one just to say, okay, this is a story where they did the wrong thing. Here's another story where they did the wrong thing. Here's another story where they did the wrong thing. Here's a story where they got right with God and did what he said. Now, I feel like when in my readings of the Old Testament, that the stories where Israel really did the right thing and got right with God are actually a lot more rare than the stories when they did something really stupid and went their own way. And then those are the times where God sent the prophets. And when we read through the prophets, we read the prophets talking, and most of the time Israel ignored them. And then every now and then Israel listened to them and responded. So then what about in 7:5 and 6? Then Samuel said, assemble all Israel at Mizpah, and I will intercede to the Lord for you. When they had assembled at Mizpah, they drew water and poured it out to the Lord. And on that day they fasted and they confessed, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel was serving as the leader of Israel at Mizpah. So Samuel said, now gather. Now we're going to gather and worship, and we're going to pour out offerings to God, and we are going to fast. Fasting is about self-denial for the purpose of focusing on God. And fasting is not popular in our culture. It's not popular in our culture because self-denial is not popular in our culture. And a regular practice of choosing self-denial in a small way by skipping a meal or fasting for a day or fasting for a week, which may be a little bit bigger for you, not a small way. But practicing intentional self-denial in those ways is a spiritual discipline where we're not just denying ourselves, but we are denying ourselves for the purpose of focusing on God and putting him first. And I just think we need to put that back in our life periodically, because we are not a people who are naturally inclined towards self-denial. And I'm not sure humans are in general or ever have been. And so we have to create disciplines that remind us that self-denial is important. It's even necessary. The last part, was that really necessary? It is necessary. It's necessary for us to do these things that remind us that we are going to choose God's will above our own desires, even above our own perceived needs. See, because food in general is a need. Now, do we need it as much as we usually consume it? Probably not. But it is a need. And so our perceived necessities, our perceived needs have this tendency to, we think, well, I'll deny my wants, but this is a need. But I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but when we start saying, well, I'll deny my wants, but this is actually a need, our category of needs starts growing until the point where people are saying, well, these sexual acts are a need, okay, and I can't live without it. And I've heard people say these kind of things, and so I think that we need to understand that that our needs are much smaller than our wants in the grand scheme of things. So if you feel like your needs are a big list, then chances are your need category has been expanding to include your wants. Okay, and now we have this situation where you say, well, I'll give up my wants for God, but I won't give up my needs. And you're holding on to a whole list of things that God's calling you to deny yourself in. So number 8, what happened in 1 Samuel 7:7? It says, when the Philistines heard that Israel had assembled at Mizpah, the rulers of the Philistines came up to attack them. When the Israelites heard of it, they were afraid because of the Philistines. So they hear they're gathered and they say, hey, we can get them all with one blow. Everybody's in the same place. They're sitting ducks. They're not up there for a battle. They're up there for worship. And this is the perfect time for us to attack. Now, that doesn't seem fair. The Philistines aren't fighting fair. That's not nice. You shouldn't do that. Well, God is just, and the people that are doing things as God calls them to do are protected here. Number 9, how did Israel respond according to 7, 8, 9? They said, do not stop crying out to the Lord for us, that he may rescue us. And then Samuel made a sacrifice of a suckling lamb on Israel's behalf. And so they were afraid, first of all, which is probably not a great thing. Although let's recognize that they hadn't had some very good experiences with the Philistines lately. Their track record in battle against the Philistines was not very good. So maybe there was good reason to be afraid, and maybe they did not yet have full confidence that God was going to be there. He had not been there for them when they were not obedient to him. And so now they're trying something new, obedience. And the question is still there, will this change anything? Will God come through? So then, but the good news is they didn't give up. They didn't run back to get weapons and things like that. They immediately just cried out to Samuel saying, don't stop, call out to God for us. So number 10, what was the result according to 7, 10, and 11? While the sacrifice and burnt offering was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day the Lord thundered a loud thunder and threw them into a panic, and they were routed. So what happened? And then the men of Israel pursued them and slaughtered them. So what happened was God thundered and they were thrown into a panic and they were routed. There's no reason this should have happened. This happened because God intervened, because they chose to truly return to God, and they were worshiping and they were sacrificing to God, and they called out to God instead of finding a way to handle this all by themselves. And therefore God answered and followed through on his promise. Number 11, why is this different from last time? Because they had returned to him, because they were truly following him, because they were in worship. Now, let me just say this. How many times have you been in prayer and something came up that needed taken care of, that needed action, and you left your time of prayer to go take action? when you maybe should have continued in your time of prayer, trusting that God would take care of this. And maybe, and I'm, look, of all people, I'm a man of action. Okay, those of you that know me know that this would be a rare thing for me to say, because I think sometimes when we're in prayer, God calls us to do something, and we need to get up and do that thing, and not just say, well, I was praying and I was waiting for God to do that thing when he said you do that thing. So of all people, I'm the one that would advocate for action. But how many times have we stopped praying to take care of something ourselves, when if we had stayed in prayer and stayed in worship and cried out to him, God would have taken care of that better than we could have. So the second part of this says, which battle does your life most closely remember? So the question is, this is different from last time. So does your life most closely resemble taking the talisman, taking the ark into battle, hoping that God will show up when you yourself have been disobedient? And so it doesn't matter that you have this item that supposedly was going to bring God into your life. That doesn't matter, because you're still routed. Or is it, does your life most closely resemble a time of submission to God, a time of worship, and when the enemy comes to attack, you cry out to God, and God routs the enemy? Now, eventually, they did run down, pursue the Philistines, so they didn't. They did go down, but God had done the work first to prepare the way, and it would have been different, I believe, if they had pursued or readied themselves for battle first, expecting that they needed to battle by themselves instead of crying out to God. And I think we might need to adjust our life plan, our way of thinking when it comes to how we live our life and what's most important. And we need to return to God and put him first and serve him only. And I think we might be amazed at the difference in how things turn out than how they've been turning out.